we lovingly call TUSC, which stands for Toronto Urban Studies Centre. So the mandate, of course, for us is to get TDSB students outside in their city and to connect the curriculum and the things that they have to learn about by getting out and enjoying it in the city. So today I'm hoping to help you see one of the interesting parts of our city, which is Kensington Market. We offer a grade 8 program there with the hopes that it inspires you to get outside and take learners outside as well. Now, as you know, we are in a stay-at-home order here, so I am not in Kensington Market now. I'm in my living room, but I did go down to Kensington Market and took just a couple of videos to try to help increase the sense of being in this space. Welcome to Kensington Market, a designated World Heritage Site in 2005. I'm going to use this space as an example of how urban spaces can be used as learning spaces. Come join me and we'll check out the area the best we can virtually. All right, so that's what we're going to be trying to do. I'm going to lay out my presentation in a what, so what, now what format. So what I am hoping to do today is share an example with you of active history and geography learning. I'm going to model an active and safe way for groups to be working outside in an urban environment and demonstrating field work and sharing with you some strategies for how to explore a neighborhood from a whole different vantage point. I'm hoping this will encourage more interest in urban navigation and discovery. Now, I have a sandwich on the screen, which might seem kind of strange, but I often think about a community exploration experiences as being the field work, which is the best part of the sandwich. That's the middle part where you get to decide what you want to put in it. You can add your own flair. It can be as big or as little, and it can be changed. But ultimately, any really good sandwich, no matter what is on the inside, needs to be bordered by some good bread or something good to hold it all together. And so when you're creating a community exploration program to really maximize your field work, you want to be prepared and then follow up whatever the students do and put it to good use. So I have a couple of resources like this slide and a few others about the preparation, field work, and follow-up that will be shared with you at the end. And I do have a habit of sharing things at mock speed because I know there's a lot to cover in a pretty short amount of time. So I don't want you to panic. I do have some resources at the end for you that you can access. So I recognize I am among a lot of professionals who may be very familiar with this stuff. So do enlighten and allow me to share these things with you, even if it is something you're familiar with. The process that we go through for preparing really good urban fieldwork ultimately starts with the preparation phase and doing the research. And I'm not going to lie, this is the most time-consuming parts. And there are times that I get very frustrated because I feel like all I'm doing is reading and learning and I haven't created, but this is a key point in accessing sources. So at the Toronto Urban Studies Centre, we create a lot of urban-based programs and access a lot of different kinds of resources. So I have a little chart here to give you some ideas of where you can start. And again, this is shared with you in a follow-up document. Any municipality's planning department would have a lot of information about urban spaces. If you have a city archives, public libraries are exceptional at accessing archival photos, looking at tax records, and the fire atlas. A lot of people say it's a fire atlas. There are fire maps, old fire maps, and they show like what buildings were made out of wood and what buildings were made out of brick and what streets were there and when did they start. It's a great way to look at a neighborhood by looking at what was there in the past. Any municipality has a land registry office and census data. The census data is very key for this particular program and knowing what to do. And once you've accessed all your sources, if you're anything like me, the ideas come flowing at you and you try to connect the things that you've learned to what you can see today. And then that moves on to getting organized. And this is when you need to choose your focus for your program. So for the program I'm sharing with you today, we're using a grade 8 geography focus, but certainly Kensington community, as well as almost any community in the city, is an opportunity to learn about the past and to view your landscape as a story. So you have many options. And that's once you have your focus, you collate all of your information, you collate it together, make revisions, and finalize. So you get to what I think is the most fun part, which is the creating part. And when you go to create your fieldwork activity, you need to make sure that the students are hearing information and hopefully from different voices, seeing unique things and given the opportunity to see things. At TUSC, we also spend time creating high quality resources to support learning. You want them to physically do things. And ultimately you do all of this prep work so that you can get the most out of going outside and getting away from buildings and looking at the land. So the learning goals for this particular program are to identify the challenges faced by newcomers to Canada, describing actions that newcomers have taken to improve their lives, and then ultimately applying it to this particular neighborhood by explaining how human activity has affected the landscape in Kensington. So we're very clear about our goals. And I can't express enough, this is a whole day program. I'm trying to cram into 45 minutes for you. For those of you that may not be familiar with this neighborhood or not familiar with Toronto, this is a neighborhood in downtown Toronto. It is located west of Yonge Street and south of Bloor Street. So it's between Bloor and the Lakeshore. And what is very interesting is that Kensington is a actually very small space, but there is so much in this one small space to explore if you know how to look for it. Because Kensington has a very long and colorful history of acting as a reception area for newcomers. So those newcomers who have come to the area over the years have an opportunity to affect the geography. So do we have hands? If not, I'll just have you type in the chat. I'd like you to raise your virtual hand or just type Y in the chat if you were born in a country other than Canada. Raise your hand or write in the chat if you have a parent who was born in a country other than Canada. And then raise your hand if you have a grandparent who was born in a country other than Canada. And I think we can see very quickly that this is a common shared experience for many people today, that either themselves or within close proximity to themselves within their family, somebody has had the experience of being a newcomer. So it is a close and personal relationship, and that's part of what makes our city so unique. Toronto is home to almost 3 million people today, and the diversity in the background and how people identify themselves is very diverse. And one thing that is always important to acknowledge is that the Indigenous roots are still very much present, alive, and included in the city. At the bottom, you can see a traditional hoop dance. There are Indigenous restaurants and businesses and art all over our city. In Toronto right now, the census indicates that 49% of the people who live in the city of Toronto were born in a country other than Canada. So again, this speaks to why Kensington is such a neighborhood that people love to learn about. 45% of the people who live here speak a language either other than or in addition to French and English. 57% live in apartments or large-scale housing developments. And the tree cover in the city is 26%, which is very different from how it would have looked prior to settlement. And these are some of the things that make this city so interesting. When someone is a newcomer to a place, there are many questions, many concerns, and many things to think about when you arrive somewhere new. So we ask students when they come to think about what some of those things are. And then for the rest of the program, we refer to those as challenges. What are some challenges that newcomers might face arriving in a new area? And what are some actions they may take to address some of those challenges? And what again makes Kensington so unique is that you can physically see evidence of past challenges and actions of different cultural groups right in this neighborhood. So we frame the day this way. The one that students always come up with almost right away is a language barrier. So I put that up and I ask students to talk to one another. Our classes are usually arranged at 8 tables with roughly 4 students at each table to promote school, combination work. And they come up with strategies for how to deal with a language barrier. So finding someone who speaks your language, taking an ESL class, using the language, your native language in a business, or attending or finding businesses that utilize the language you're familiar with. And of course, moving or visiting areas where there are other people that speak the language that is common to you. And I often connect how these are actual things that you can see in Kensington community. You can see businesses with language signs. You can see advertisements for ESL classes. And there is a history of people living in the same area who share that history. That is only one of the challenges. So in an effort to move more quickly, I will go over these quite quickly, but on student tables, we give them their own example of a challenge and ask them to come up with actions. So not being able to find affordable housing, experiencing discrimination, arriving with a lack of money, not being able to find the services you require, missing home, not being able to secure work, not having a place of worship, and having poor conditions around your experience when you arrive. And we we described that all of these kinds of challenges lead to a changing landscape. And Kensington is a perfect example of how the neighborhood land has changed based on what is needed. So as I said, these are generally student directed, but we will go through them quickly. So in terms of missing home, historically in the Kensington area, you'll see evidence of people who have started to sell food and products from their homelands and renovating the buildings that are there to be more familiar to homes from their homeland. Poor conditions. Kensington has a long history of people protesting and demanding changes, seeking equity and improving things for newcomers and for those that are around newcomers. Accessing affordable housing. So back when the land was owned by fewer people, subdividing the land and making it smaller so that the housing is more available, or taking single homes and putting them into rooming houses or separate apartments. Not having money. Before school was legislated off it, obviously children would be working, and a lot of properties in Kensington still have historical gardens that are there for growing food. Not being able to find work. Often these newcomers have been quite resourceful and industrious and started their own businesses. Lacking services, raising money, or in the earlier days, accessing philanthropy or faith-based services. Not having a place to worship, building places. So as you walk through Kensington, if you take a few moments and identify the different places of worship, it helps to unfold the stories of the people who have lived there. And experiencing discrimination. I have to say, I love this neighborhood because it has created a welcoming community just through its history. There's a lot of education, there are protests, there are signs up everywhere. It really feels like an eclectic place where anyone can come and spend their time. And of course, the changing landscape. All of these things lead to an alteration of places and spaces for the needs of the people who are there. So, small little video here.
It started as the Jewish market. Victorian houses became storefronts, kosher butchers, tailors, and bakeries. Soon enough, other immigrants came to our community. Each arrival added a piece to the patchwork of our bustling bazaar. We all understood that with hard work, anything was possible. Over time, faces and languages changed, but the spirit of our village inside the city remained. See, it didn't matter where you were from, the market became home.
Neighborhoods like Toronto's Kensington Market have helped shape Canada by bringing newcomers shoulder to shoulder to build new lives together.
So an urban neighborhood was designated a National Historic Site in 2005, and that's no small thing. And I kind of feel like this 2-minute Heritage Minute maybe speaks better than I can in the next 45 minutes about how unique this land is and why it's worth exploring. The one place I feel it stops short is that it says that the story starts as the Jewish market, and I beg to differ. I think that all of the land in our city the beginnings are in Indigenous territories, and those territories are the lands of the Wendat, the Onondaga, and the Mississauga. And as I mentioned and acknowledged earlier, the presence is enduring, and there are Indigenous restaurants in Kensington, and the landscape continues from there. Now, the city, no doubt, the landscape has changed. Our city has grown quickly from the 10,000 years up until now that includes the Indigenous territories. Things really started to change on the land with European settlement, and that started in 1793. That comes from the Toronto Purchase, when the British purchased the land and wanted to establish home here as a protection spot against a potential American invasion. And this is where the first Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, John Graves Simcoe, was sent by the King to come and create a new capital. And this is how the community of Toronto, or what we call Toronto today, started in terms of European settlement. Simcoe needed to move people to this new capital that he was starting. So he started by inviting government and military officials, but because there was no European settlement, he was struggling to get people willing to come. This was not a way that people who were from England and Europe at that time wanted to live in a community. They wanted wooden sidewalks, they wanted banks and things like that. So John Graves Simcoe himself was faced with some of those challenges. needed to make the landscape change in order to appeal to have people come. The conditions weren't what people wanted, and it lacked the service that the people he was trying to draw wanted. So in order to take action, he spoke their language and he offered free land to people. He said, well, the British own this land now from their point of view, and now you can have free land here if you're willing to come. And it worked. It included bringing the Denison family directly from England, who arrived in 1796. And his oldest son ended up buying some more land, 1.5 park lots just outside of the little town. That goes from modern day Bloor Street down to modern day Queen Street. That is a great deal of land in our city today that one person had ownership of. His son, George Denison, married a woman named Esther Borden Lippincott, and he builds a home and he calls it Bellevue. He built it for his family. This is what the house looks like. It is not still standing, but that red square that I show you on your screen, that is the red square I showed you on the map earlier. That is the entire Kensington community today. Only a small portion of the land that this family owned. And this was the family that started to subdivide the land, and they were able to name the streets. And so you can see some of the street names have connections to that history of land ownership. So I tell you this just by ways of saying that there is so much to uncover in the neighborhood if you know a little bit about it. So I've just started by telling you a very small amount of the story. And as you can see, the story continues and goes much further. I will catch you at the end and I will fill you in on the middle. But with our students, we want them to be active. So instead of me telling them the history, we want them to have the opportunity to explore it. So in their groups of 4, we generally divide them into 4 groups, and they become experts on one of these 4 time periods of the Kensington Market experience. And then they come back and share it with one another so that in the afternoon, they all know a little bit of everything and are experts in one. So of course, for students, we have them going through their section looking for challenges, actions, and evidence. So for the sake of time, in a moment, I am going to have Sunya post in the chat some links in there. Like I said, our 4 parts. I just want to give you about 2 minutes to check out one of the parts. I will be reviewing all 4 parts, so you will have access to this after if you would like to explore the 4 parts more in depth. But just to try to get a diversity of people looking at different things, if you're born in January, February, March, I encourage you to choose a link to part 1. April, May, and June, choose the link to part 2. July, August, September, choose the link to part 3. And part 4 for those of you born in October, November, and December. And I'll give you about 2 minutes to do that. Let's give you about a minute more just to look through so you have a sense of the kind of information the students are equipped with. And like I mentioned, you'll have access to that. I'll keep the settings open for you for after that. But so that you are equipped for when we do our virtual visit of Kensington, I'm going to review the sections for you. So come on back if you haven't done that already. To continue with the story of the sort of British influence in terms of the landscape in the Kensington area, you can see that it spans about 90 years. So as the population increases, the Denison family starts to subdivide some of their land. And when they subdivide their land, of course, they name the streets. So again, you sort of see that history in some of the street names in the Kensington community. And the Denisons envisioned large Victorian homes, Victorian meaning the peak on the side. They pictured these grand homes being built in these subdivisions that they were building. They also built their own private family chapel called St. Stephen's in the Fields. It's an Anglican church that is still in use today on College Street. But the city kept on growing, and there was a need for workers who were skilled in the trade. So this enticed more people from the British Isles, mostly from Ireland and Scotland. But a lot of the workers who arrived could not secure affordable housing. They could not afford to purchase or build these grand homes. So in response to that, the Denisons further subdivided their property. And this is where you see the sort of classic Toronto row houses with the Victorian peaks. And some of them were made one story, and they were known as workers' cottages. And they all had these Victorian peaks. Down the road from the church is some of the original grand homes that the Denisons had planned for this street when they subdivided their land. And knowing that over the time, a lot of people couldn't afford houses of that size, the land was further subdivided, making smaller houses still on large lots, but a number of houses on the same size of lots. So you can actually, if you know what you're looking for, if you notice it, you can see this as you're walking through there. There are, I think, 2 spots in the neighborhood that still have small rows of workers' cottages as well. So as you can see, the British influence was largely on the architecture and creating a residential neighborhood. So this was Kensington originally was a residential neighborhood, and it was largely lived in by people of British ancestry for about 90 years. But as the city grew and prosperity increased, there started to be a bit of an exodus from the neighborhood. And this started to change the use of the neighborhood with the Jewish influence. Jews were escaping persecution from Eastern Europe, of course, and Russia. And if you take a look at the statistics, in the year 1900, there were 3,000 people in Toronto who were Jewish. And over the next 13 years, that population increased to 32,000, contributing to 1/6 of Toronto's population. But many of the people who were arriving, the Jews who were arriving, were not affluent at all, right? They had been living in hardship. So they settled in an area of the city that was known as the Ward, which is right near modern day City Hall here in Toronto. It was known as a slum. There was very poor services and a lot of poverty. So as British residents of this neighborhood started to move out, it left vacant spaces and Jews began to move in. And there was rapid growth at this time period and a severe lack of services for these newcomers. So today, a lot of services are offered by the 3 levels of government, but at this time period, services were often, needs were often met by philanthropists or by faith-based organizations. And in Toronto today, you'll still see that. There's United Way centers, there's St. Stephen's Community House and St. Christopher's House. All of these are places that largely serve the needs of newcomers. They got their start in Kensington as well. So you can see that in there today. A lot of the Jews were restricted on the kinds of jobs they could have. So when they got here, they resumed the jobs that they had been doing back home. And one of them is being a peddler. So pushing your cart to sell your wares. And they moved into these houses. And over time, of course, they would park their carts in front of their houses. But as people started to learn more about this, they would, wake up in the morning and people would already be starting to conglomerate around their homes to look at their wares. So they would build awnings in front of their house. So they stopped having to push their carts around because people were coming to them. And as the population and the interest increased, this is where you see a huge change from residential area to partially commercial area from a residential area, because the homes were actually had extensions built onto the front with those awnings, and you still see those today. And this area went to, in 1930, there were 60,000 Jews living just in this neighborhood. So it was a very large influence. And there are still 2 synagogues in this area today. So again, evidence. So just down the street from St. Stephen's in the Field is the Kiever Synagogue. Here on the corner of Denison Square and Bellevue Avenue is where Bellevue Estate was originally built, and it is now the home of the Kiev Synagogue, which was built here quite some time ago. And right across the street is a park called Bellevue Square Park. So So you can just sort of see in one little corner, you're seeing all these pieces of the story starting to come together once you know a little bit about the story. It was very cold that day, so it's also very weird to watch yourself talk. So the Kiever Synagogue was built in 1927. So many Jews in the Kensington area also worked in the garment industry, so along Spadina Avenue, and the conditions were very poor. Labor laws were being violated and workers were being exploited. So the Labor Lyceum was established in reaction to this. And 1925, many Jewish union offices were included in this Labor Lyceum, and thus is sort of the birthplace of how this neighborhood is known for being active and for speaking and working to improve conditions for other people, strikes and all kinds of things. So that part of the history, that sort of feistiness of understanding and advocating for what's right has deep roots in this neighborhood. I appear to have frozen. Let's see. Not sure why I'm frozen. You know how often I teach and have never had this happen to me? Let's see. Maybe I'll stop the share. There we go. Are you guys able to see it now? There you go. Are you able to see it again? Thumbs up if you're able to see it. Okay, great. Thank you. So you can see that the Jews were in the area for about 50 years. So it was and it was known, the area became known as the Jewish market. And again, though, with 40 and 50 years of good advocacy and improved conditions, people started to disperse and move into different parts of the city, which opened up this neighborhood again for new waves of immigration. So this is not letting me play. There we go. In the 1940s, after World War II, the whole new wave of immigration. And in this particular area, it was largely immigrants from Hungary, the Ukraine, and Italy, and settled in different parts around the Kensington area. But a particular Hungarian immigrant named William Mihalik, he starts to run Williams Bargain. So it's a secondhand store, and thus introduces what is still very prevalent in Kensington today, that secondhand store and boutiques. His son actually opened up a business called Tom's Place. And here's a photograph of Tom's Place. This is only a small portion of Tom's Place. It has expanded over the years to take up, I believe it's 5 or 6 former houses. And you can see the bottom of the Victorian peak there. And I love it. I was watching the Junos, I don't know, it was probably 10 years ago now, but it feels like a couple of years ago. And they interviewed somebody, a celebrity, on their way in, and they said, "Oh, I really like your suit." And they said, "Oh yeah, I got this at Tom's Place in Kensington Market." So, I mean, this neighborhood and the things that are there have become a bit of a cultural icon. So you can still see Tom's Place, which is still a family-run Hungarian business. There's also a restaurant called the Hungary Thai, which specializes in Hungarian and Thai food. So again, it's, you know, knowing what you're looking for when you're in the neighborhood. Between 1951 and 61, the number of Jews in the area dropped from 30,000 to 800. So it was a mass exodus in a short amount of time. So the area continues to be a market, but it is now known as the Kensington Market. And Portuguese newcomers are attracted to this area because of the affordable housing. So they start their own businesses, classic Portuguese businesses. And another big change on the landscape from the Portuguese that is obvious today is modifications to the housing to make it more affordable, rooming houses and apartments. So you see a lot of buildings in Kensington that might have, it looks like a single family home, but it has 5 or 6 mailboxes on it. And they also altered the looks of some of these British styled homes to resemble the more Mediterranean style that they would have been used to at home. So the use of something called angel stone, so a lighter colored decorative, looks sort of like stone. They often paint the brick, use Mediterranean arches to replace the rectangular door frames. Many people from Portugal are Roman Catholic, so representations of that, and also the use of wrought iron fences. Starting in the 1970s, it was rapid immigration in Canada and here in Toronto. So I am going to cover many cultures in a short amount of time, not to disclaim the impact of any of them, but there were many cultures and many changes of things you can still see today. So the 70s sees a huge increase of newcomers from Southeast Asia, which makes sense because Chinatown on Spadina, next door Spadina, was established at around this time as well. So you see a huge increase in cultural icons, symbols, and the language, as well as a lot of businesses that remain today. In the 70s and the 80s, you start to see increases in the census of newcomers from West Indies. And this is where things start to change. Few few newcomers from the West Indies settle in the Kensington area, but they find business opportunities in the market because the use of the market has started to change. It started to become a tourist attraction. It's starting to have appeal outside of just the original neighborhood. So you do see a lot of great West Indies restaurants, music, food, and products all throughout the neighborhood. In the 80s, Latin American countries are in turmoil, specifically Colombia and Chile. And so they start moving, some of these shops start opening up in the spaces of retiring Portuguese shop owners. So again, the neighborhood's got a really eclectic, great feel. I was there just the other day, brought home some churros for my family. That's how you keep people happy in a pandemic. And of course, conflicts in the Middle East in the 90s also leads to emigration, and Kensington becomes an attractive option for business opportunities as well. So basically, if you're ever hungry, this is a great place to go to get a wide variety of options for food as well as products in general. In the 90s through the early 2000s, there were a lot of newcomers from Africa, specifically Somalia and the Sudan, and they find business opportunities in the market as well. So it's a fantastic place to visit. And like I said, I did that in rapid succession. If you use that link after my session, you can find out about more of these places in detail. Today, it's more of the same. There's a lot of old and new coexisting. So if you look at the photograph on the left, the sign up high says Casa Lisboa, which is a former Portuguese business, right next door to the vegan, gluten-free, organic bakery. Okay, and if you look at the photograph on the right, you see the Hungary Thai restaurant in a very obviously Victorian peaked house with an extension right next door to a more high density housing option selling Mexican food. So there's a lot of history all kind of crammed up to each other when you know how to look for it. This particular cafe, I think maybe has suffered from COVID. I'm not sure the status of it at the time, but what I really liked about this was it was a similar trend of wanting to help newcomers, but in a different format. So it was a nonprofit cafe that was dedicated to working with refugees to help them establish skills and retraining. So at any time you could go in there and there was people volunteering their time to meet and help get people established, and they only hired new immigrants. So this neighborhood still is a draw for newcomers who are needing a place to start in a welcoming environment. And that's what I also love about this place. Both of these signs are just two examples of many that I saw. The one at the top I saw on a bar, assigned to a bar, and the one at the bottom was in somebody's window. It's a whole neighborhood dedicated to being inclusive and making sure the message is out there that people are welcome. Vintage clothing, as I mentioned, from the Mahalik family, that's a trend that has continued with gusto since the 70s as well, starting with a store called Courage My Love. Pardon the fact that I did it as a selfie, so all the words are backwards, but you'll get the point.
I'm standing in front of Courage My Love, one of the first secondhand stores to utilize a Victorian home with an awning and an addition to sell retro clothing. And if we take a look around, you can really see the history of the Victorian households and all of these different secondhand shops and unique stores, including the King of Kensington vintage store.
So the King of Kensington was a very successful CBC TV show, very famous across Canada. I figure it must have been akin to like Schitt's Creek in its time. And people across Canada loved this show. Apparently it's a bit before my time. And they all were very familiar with Al Waxman, who was a Jew who grew up in the Kensington area. There's actually a monument to him in the park there today. And that is attributed, that people attribute that TV show to the cross-country interest in this neighborhood. My mother tells a story from before my brother and I were born, and my brother's like 50 something, that when my mom and dad came down here, they'd heard about Kensington Market and came over to see it. And that was like more than 50 years ago. And a lot of it, I think, had to do again with this TV show. But knowing that these houses were built that long time ago, a lot of buildings are starting to fall into disrepair. And this enters the challenge and the action of something called gentrification, which is the process of restoring and upgrading rundown urban areas. And it's usually done by middle class or affluent people and businesses. It makes sense. Things are falling apart. They're becoming unsafe or dilapidated. But the opposite side is that it often pushes out the lower income and longer time residents. It's a great conversation to have with students and having them identify what they see as gentrification and what they think about it. Here are an example of 3 big businesses that tried to open up in Kensington. Big businesses want to monopolize on this unique, eclectic part of the city that has a huge draw. They were met with extreme resistance and protests, and all 3 of these giants, including Walmart, backed out. They had everything secured. They got signs up and everything, and they all backed out from that. I put a link at the bottom. I can share it in the chat at the end. It's just a random article. I think if you Google gentrification in Kensington, you'll be able to find that as well. So what? So that was the what. Here's the so what. Why is it important to take students outside in a community, either their community or a unique urban community? For Kensington, it serves as a microcosm of Toronto or a microcosm of Canada in general. But in general, going outside into your community encourages empathy, it encourages connection, and it encourages understanding to the past, because knowing where we are now, really, you invest in it if you understand where you came from. It helps establish a sense of place and land awareness, and it promotes inclusion and advocacy. So this brings us to the fieldwork part. And again, this is shared in that folder you'll be given access to. When you go out to do field work in the city, safety has to be your top priority. Bring a first aid kit. You just don't know what could happen. Make sure that anybody who needs to know where you're going knows the time and the place and when you're expected to be back. For our fieldwork, students are put into usually groups of 4. We have found to be ideal, sometimes splitting off into 2 groups of 2, but always staying together because there is safety in numbers. Have people bring their water bottles, and of course, always be aware of the protocols about operating in an urban environment. I had a student teacher with me once who we were walking from the school near Kensington to City Hall. And I said, well, do you want to walk at the front with me? And she said, oh, I can walk at the back. I said, well, how about you walk at the front and I'll walk you through what goes on in my mind when I lead with the kids. She's like, all right, don't you just walk? And at the end, I had no idea, you're looking for the alleyway. And when you stop at a traffic light with a class, you have to stay, you're not blocking an entrance to a business. And there's all these little things. So you want to make sure your students are confident with knowing where they're allowed to cross, how they cross, how that looks, and also being prepared for the unexpected. What do you tell students about dogs that are off leash? What do you tell students about encountering somebody that makes them feel uncomfortable and empowering them to respond in a way that's confident? Other considerations are accessibility. I encourage you to walk the places that you're going to bring students to explore so that you know where the potential problem areas or accessibility spots are. I can't stress to you enough, there is no bad weather for fieldwork, except maybe lightning. And that it's almost always colder than students think it's going to be. A couple pairs of gloves in your backpack will go an incredibly long way for students who might not be prepared. Washrooms. Of course, you encourage students to go to the washrooms before you leave, but you need to know where washrooms are for emergencies or for any other needs. Find out if there's a cost and how you can mitigate that cost if it's a barrier. I've been doing field work for a long time, and we always use digital cameras and other stuff. And even still, I'm like, oh, did I charge that enough? I can't stress to you enough how important it is to have all your stuff charged and to carry some spare batteries, because cold weather sucks out your batteries. And decide where you stand on food. Sounds like a small thing, but it can become a very big thing. I've seen it happen between teachers and their students. You're not allowed to snack. I thought I could have a snack. You're not allowed to go shopping. Let them know what they're allowed to do in terms of food. Can they stop into the corner store while they're doing field work? Just that's my suggestion, is lay that out before you go. And then of course, considering what you're going to bring for field work, remembering not to have them do things that aren't needed. It should all be feeding your focus, right? You're going outside with a purpose. It should be portable. You don't need to be people don't need to be carrying things beyond their means. And any field work should always have an opportunity to record, because you're wanting students to make observations about what's around them, and you want to take that pressure off their working memory to have to remember it all later. Give them some way to record it in whatever way works for you. We like to think at Tusk that we've got it all figured out. We have these plastic clipboards that we put an elastic through the hole so the paper doesn't fly. We tie a string, and then we actually drill holes through pencils to tie the other end of the string to. And it might sound ridiculous. We've tried other things. This works. Pencils and paper work fine in small smatterings of rain. What does not work well is pens and markers and things like that. You just need to bring your pencil sharpener with you. We've also even gone so far as to get large Ziploc bags that, if necessary, students can put their clipboard into the sleeve and they can still write inside of it in cases of higher rainfall. So something to think about. Always encouraging navigation skills. Students should never be asked to move around in an urban area without a map. Give them time to do what you've asked them to do, and hopefully they are dressed in the proper footwear. So here's where we are.
I'm standing at the usually very busy corner of Augusta and Baldwin, where there are all kinds of businesses and lots of activity usually happening in this area. It's sort of the heart of the market, and it's a great place to explore all kinds of eclectic and diverse things, brimming with history and information that is yours to discover if you know what you're looking for.
I was in Kensington the other day, and it's understandably pretty quiet. You can see my mask hanging from my ear there. It's pretty quiet right now, understandably, but it's normally a very thriving area. And so if you're taking students to an area like this that has a lot of action, for example, I know that Baldwin Avenue often has a lot of activity. So when I have my students out wandering around, I keep an extra presence in that area because sometimes it can be intimidating. And I don't want my students to feel adrift without having some sort of anchor to feel confident with. We like to keep students busy. I think purposeful exploration makes a lot of sense. So we have, as I said, we try to operate in groups of 4 or of course 3 or 5 as needed. And we provide them with a map and we provide them with photo clues because we send them where we want them to go and they need to make sure they're looking at the right thing. We equip our students with digital cameras. Today, students can often use their own phones, whatever you decide to do. We also give them information about what they're looking at because it's a lot to retain, as you're probably feeling. So we provide them with some clues and a place to record their observations, as well as some support materials. The maps are important. In this particular area, we outline where the market area is in contrast to where the community is. So they're kind of getting a full experience of the whole area. And we set up very clear boundaries. In all of my years of working in Kensington, I've never had a student cross any of those 4 streets. So I know they're never lost. They know they're never lost. And because they have a clearly identified route, I can generally always find them when I need to. We have a meeting place and the route goes in order. They need to follow the numbers in order. You'll notice there's these stop signs there. That's because I generally set my groups up in partners or twin groups. They are looking at totally different things, but they're walking in the same way. So here are 2 side-by-side maps where the students go to group stop 1, they make their way to stop 2, and then you see there's the stop sign there. That lets them know you cannot and do not move on to stop number 3 until you have stopped and made a connection with your other group or the adult that is supervising you. It's just a way of having security and confidence and a sense that you know somebody's always going to show up if you need something. I have a video of me and some of my very favorite colleagues of all time, and I edited it down for brevity for you, but I feel like it best shows how we get our students to do this field work. It's about 2 minutes long. Enjoy.
Your first task is to hand out the different resources to all the members of your group. Look at your map and orient it to the north. Then look for the street names and plan a route to your first stop. Confirm your location by looking around for street signs. Start following your route. When you think you're in the right place, the person with the photo clues should start comparing them with the buildings across the street. Look at that image beside the number 11. I can see that right there. We found it. Now it's time to match the word clue. The name in Creole from the West Indies means the small hummingbird. The food blends African ingredients with what? That doesn't match this building. These semi-detached houses were built by the immigrants who came to this area during the 1950s and 60s. Semi-detached, that's 2 houses that share a common wall, just like the one in front of us. Notice the icon of a saint by one of the front doors. Most of the immigrants from this region of the world were Roman Catholic. That must be what we saw in the photo clue. In their homeland, these people built homes with wrought iron fences, arches, angel stone, and neat, attractive front yards. There's the icon of a saint, wrought iron, angel stone. This clue must be the match for this stop. Subdivide lots. Build to look like home. 1793, 1815, keep going, 1950s and 60s. Immigrants from Portugal arrive in Kensington and change houses by adding wrought iron, arches, icons, angel stone, and gardens. There's a picture of subdivided lots, and here's an image of narrow, semi-detached and row houses. People from Britain did that back in the 1870s to make the properties more affordable. The next column on the worksheet asks us to use jot notes to list the evidence that we saw that backs up the inferences we just made about the actions taken by these 2 groups, the British and the Portuguese. There's all the evidence right in front of us. A house attached to another in the middle, semi-detached, with an icon of a saint, a nice yard, and a wrought iron fence. Take a photo of your location. that shows the evidence you've recorded on your worksheet. You can take your photos either portrait style or landscape style. If you take more than one photo, make sure to record the photo number in the same row as the evidence it shows. It's time to continue on your route. Remember to switch every 2 locations.
So that's just a brief look at what we do. And you can see that at Tusk, when we're doing urban field work, it's purposeful. It's purposeful, it's busy, it relies on collaboration, and they have what they need to be successful. There's an incredible amount of learning that happens on these field trips. So I don't necessarily expect you to have retained everything, but I have shared up on my screen here the helpful hints and the Kensington timeline. And I actually have a Jamboard. And the first 3 pages of the Jamboard are just these 2 resources that I have on my screen now. But the last 4 pages, each page shows a photograph of a section of Kensington. And I would like for you to use the sticky note feature to just identify what you might recognize as evidence of the past based on what you've learned from so far. I'm just going to give us, let me see how much time we have left. I'm only going to give us about 2 minutes. Just do the best that you can. I think the Jamboard link has been shared. So if you could go check that out. So like I said, there's pictures on page 4, 5, 6, and 7. So just taking a look at the pictures and seeing what you can identify as cultural signifiers would be great. Throw some sticky notes on there. Taking a look at page 4, if you haven't already, what I really love about that is you can see, so the Victorian peak homes, of course, were connected. Sometimes the peak, the houses were divided in the middle of the peak. And if you look up in that picture, you can see that 2 peaks are left with a renovated building in the middle. So you actually see half peaks left of the former, so Powwow is an Indigenous restaurant. I just saw somebody post that sticky. Powwow is an Indigenous cafe serving Indigenous foods. So yeah, you guys get the point here. Yeah. And on the last page, that's one of the synagogues there. And that's a West Indies product store to the left of it, and an Asian restaurant to the right, as well as a huge parking garage. Somebody said, is that a parking garage? And it is. So thank you for that. Let me see where I'm at. So I'm at the end. So these are the pictures that we were looking at, and that will stay live. You can continue to contribute that. I just want to move on to the follow-up. So once you've got the students out doing this work, you want to drive it home from there and make some connections, apply their brains, get their brains to apply what they've learned and try to relate it to the larger world of learning. Ask students what ideas they've come up with so that they can continue to investigate what is interesting to them. And this is where you might ask students to create something. A lot of the students who come to our programs do create presentations with the maps and the photos that they've taken along with the notes. Some can make games or write stories, create art. The urban art in Kensington alone is worth a field trip. And of course, you want to culminate. You want to assess how you've done and how they've done and how well your focus worked. Reflect. Should I spread this over 2 days? Should I make this shorter? Should I make the group smaller? Make edits as needed. And no matter what, if you take students outside and explore your urban neighborhood, you will never regret it because the students will be happy and you'll have done a good job. So now what? I want you to go safely and purposefully out to explore urban landscapes, engender a sense of place and importance in your community. And hopefully that will inspire you to create opportunities to learn from the spaces that are around you and discover new parts of the city, Kensington, or even something nearby to you. Support others, support yourself, and just support outdoor learning the best you can. Thank you for your time. That's it for me. I crammed it all in. I don't know if there was any questions, but I'm happy to answer any if there are any questions.
A lot of interesting comments in the chat box for sure, if you get a chance to look at them afterwards. So we will be sharing the link to all of those resources. So I got a couple of comments. I've got to admit, I was born and raised in Toronto, and I had a huge history lesson this afternoon. So thank you for that, because that's certainly a history that I was not familiar with, all of those different aspects of the development of the city as well. And the other thing that I really appreciate, Kathleen, is all of the amazing practical tips that you shared with the group as well. One of the ones that I made sure I took a picture of it is the clipboard. Working with elementary students outside, that certainly is a tip that I'm going to take back to my teacher candidates as well. So we've got a couple more minutes. If there's anybody have any questions that they would like to ask or anything else you'd like to put into the chat box, that would be great. But Kathleen, thank you. That was an amazing, a whirlwind, as you told us at the beginning that you were going to go through it very quickly, but it was amazing. I'm very impressed with how you could cram so much information in such a short period of time. So thank you for that.
Being a fast talker helps.
I think that's a skill we have as educators.
I can't express enough that it's purposeful and giving students something to do. I know that there have been times that people said, oh, don't give them clipboards. Let's just go let them look around.
No.
Students, people like to have a place to put their stuff and to go back to it and look at it later. And I just think it's purposeful. It gives them a feeling of responsibility. Are there any questions? I did, in the link that will be in the chat, if it's not there already, there is a link that's kind of an outline of what I put in this presentation, and it also has my email address if you need to contact me for anything. And I did the sandwich thing with the tips for the 3 parts. I included that, as well as the PDFs for the 4 parts of Kensington, if you'd like to look at that at a more leisurely pace. Nothing?
Oh, there's Elise has a question. Any tips for taking kids on public transport?
Oh, yeah.
Public transit, yeah.
Should find where the chat is. I've got nothing but tips on how to take children for public transit. Very quick side story. I'm not from Toronto. I grew up 4 hours west of Thunder Bay. And when I got put at Tusk because my other center closed, I went with a colleague and I said, we're taking the kids on the subway. I totally panicked. It didn't make any sense to me. And now I think it's the greatest thing you can do to empower an entire generation on how to operate on the TTC. Yes, there are a lot of tips. I see that my clock is just ticking and I can hear it in my ears. Yes, definitely do take the TTC as one of my things. Don't let the students be afraid of the TTC, but empower them to know how to operate. Tell them about why we take off backpacks. Tell them about why we sit rather than standing when we have the option, because it is a safer way to travel as a group. And I also encourage you to walk with your students. Use TTC and walking when possible, when we are not in this situation. Danica, do you tie in environmental connections? For this particular program, I'll be truthful, this particular program is on grade 8 geography. The Toronto Urban Studies Center offers about 30 different programs. They aren't all active right now, obviously, but we have many of our programs that do have a more environmental focus. But that said, that can be a focus. You could go to Kensington and ask them to look for environmental focuses or to look for things that are happening in the environment and what they mean. So again, I was just explaining this particular program, but absolutely looking at environmental impacts in urban neighborhoods is a possibility.
So thank you. And I'm just going to one last point. Kathleen is presenting again tomorrow morning on another aspect of urban studies. So you might want to check that session out tomorrow at 11:30. So thank you, everybody, for attending our session. And hopefully you've picked some kind of fun activity